Hello, Violet Kitty. I understand your pet peeve, and it even applies when people really do insist on free speech in just every venue. Like, let's say, in a cafe or a restaurant or something like this. But we're not talking about a cafe or restaurant. We're talking about something that exists solely for the purpose of communication. And I have a pet peeve when people do what you've done and take this trivial pursuit. Yes, the government shall establish no law. That makes it seem like private industry can do whatever it wants, right? There's a couple problems with that. Okay, first of all, let's take television, good old-fashioned broadcast, television and radio. We don't have free speech on a radio station, right? Because it's privately held. And if they prohibit speech, government hasn't done that, right? Except wait, because they're public airwaves. And then the government leases them out to private leaseholders on that band of the spectrum. And the government has established a law that you or I cannot broadcast. We can't broadcast. We have to go through this process. So really, government did establish a law. So that's what I'm getting at. Government established a law that ended up limiting free speech. They established a law saying that you can't use that airway, that a private industry can, and therefore they ended up establishing a law where the end result was a lack of free speech. And this is the reason it's important to remember the intent of laws like this. Because for one thing, the government shouldn't be allowed a loophole where if somebody in the government wants to prohibit free speech, they just have to get in there and make sure they sell that resource, that communication resource, to a private party that can prohibit it. But see, they established a law that didn't directly limit free speech, it indirectly did it, and that's supposed to be good enough? I don't think so. And with the internet, it's the same kind of situation. It's more difficult to talk about which are the laws and which are not, and we have a right, in a sense, to broadcast still. So our free speech hasn't been totally cut off as it was when we had such a few number of broadcast networks dominating our airwaves. But still, the government created the internet. It established the internet, and if free speech is taken away on the internet, then the government has to look at the way it established those laws and see if any of the laws it established contribute to this prohibition that can happen from private parties on free speech. And if some establishment of some law that they have written and enacted allowed private property owners to interfere with free speech you otherwise would have if the laws had been formed different, then there is a free speech issue. And since the whole point, this whole basis of the worldwide internet is based by governments, including and especially the U.S. government, of course you're going to find that something about that structure was contributed to by laws of the United States. And so you're going to find, if you trace it, that indeed the government does have a role and individual citizens have a right to make complaints about free speech issues, even when they're using a media that is partially privately owned. It's partially privately owned. And so that's the issue. Now, on the other hand, I don't hold much hope for this because I've seen how websites go, and I've hooked up with lots of websites early on that became really popular. I wasn't really that early to YouTube, but I've seen it before, and I was early enough to know that the internet has a sort of a free speech ethos, and people tend to want to speak freely to each other. And in groups like that, those that can't handle that free speech tend to self-select themselves out of the process. So you have a really vibrant group of people that'll be blunt and say what they think, and you get a lot of energetic interconnections. And this generates popularity often. And as that happens, more conservative economic and traditional influences come into that medium, and usually the private property owners voluntarily relent on their previous libertine policies and put a strain on the situation. Since free speech law is often interpreted the way, according to your pet peeve, they have no trouble getting away with this. And those of us interested in the real internet, the real back and forth, the unlimited back and forth, that peer-to-peer communication is really all about, we just move elsewhere, make somebody else successful, and then when they get successful, we lose them and move elsewhere, and so on. So I'm not too worried, though. I do like to see people fighting it, And you're mistaken, though, in the idea that people don't have any foot to stand on. They do, because the government has enacted laws that have led to a restriction of free speech and therefore violated the First Amendment.